How could a single joke, tossed out during a drunken game, shatter everything I'd built? What did I think would happen after I laughed at my husband's pain in front of friends? And why did I never see his revenge coming, right up until the divorce papers landed on my pillow? I'm Iria Vellum, and I need you to understand something before you judge me. I'm not the villain in this story. I'm a 32-year-old insurance claims analyst who just wanted to feel alive again. Is that really so terrible? My husband Jonas Harker is a high school teacher, 35 years old and about as exciting as watching paint dry. For 9 years of marriage, I watched him grade papers every evening, heard him discuss lesson plans over dinner, and endured his mother Gina's pointed comments about my priorities. Our daughter Norah, 9 years old, seemed to prefer his quiet bedtime stories to my attempts at fun conversation. The suffocation was real. Every morning, I'd wake up in our suburban house, feeling like I was drowning in beige walls and routine. Jonas would kiss my forehead, the same spot, the same pressure, the same timing, before leaving for Jefferson High School. I'd drive to Meridian Insurance, process claims for fender benders and water damage, then come home to more of the same. That's when I started going to Fitcore Gym. "You're glowing lately," my mother Vivian said during one of our weekly phone calls. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up. You deserve happiness, sweetheart." Mom never liked Jonas. She thought he was too passive, too content with mediocrity. "A woman like you needs excitement," she'd say. "Don't let him dim your light." The first time I saw Caleb Finch at Fitcore, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, that flutter of possibility. He was 31, all lean muscle and easy confidence, with dark hair that fell perfectly across his forehead when he demonstrated exercises. "Your form's good," he said after watching me struggle with deadlifts. "But you're holding back. Don't be afraid to push yourself." Those words felt like permission. Cal became my personal trainer, then my confidant. During our sessions, I found myself sharing frustrations about Jonas's predictability, his lack of ambition, his contentment with our small life. "You're too vibrant for that," Cal would say, spotting me during bench presses. "You need someone who matches your energy." The conversations grew longer. Training sessions became coffee afterward at the Bistro, a trendy cafe bar downtown. Cal listened when I talked about feeling invisible in my own marriage, about Jonas's family treating me like an outsider. "His mother acts like I'm not good enough for him," I confided one afternoon over lattes. "She makes these little comments about my work schedule, my priorities, like being an insurance analyst isn't respectable enough." Cal's hand brushed mine across the table. "Their loss. You're incredible, Iria." At home, the distance between Jonas and me grew obvious. He'd ask about my extended gym sessions, and I'd deflect with complaints about his boring routine. "You never want to do anything spontaneous," I'd say, when he questioned my late nights. "It's always lesson plans and grading. When's the last time you surprised me?" Jonas would retreat to his study, and I'd text Cal about how misunderstood I felt. Our daughter Norah started asking uncomfortable questions. "Why are you always at the gym, Mom?" she asked one evening while Jonas helped with homework. "Mommy needs to take care of herself," I explained. "It's called self-care, honey." But Nora's eyes held worry that made my stomach twist. The family dynamics became more strained during Sunday dinners at Gina's house. Jonas's mother would set the table with her good china, and his younger brother Tristan would try to keep conversations light, but tension simmered beneath every interaction. "Iria looks tired," Gina observed one Sunday, her tone suggesting concern that felt more like criticism. "Are you getting enough rest, dear?" "I'm fine," I replied, knowing she was really asking about my frequent absences. "Just staying active." Jonas said nothing, but I caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't read. At work, my colleague Janet Myers noticed changes too. "You seem different lately," she said during our lunch break. "Happier, but also distracted. Everything okay at home?" "Everything's great," I lied, checking my phone for messages from Cal, just focusing on myself more. The lies came easier each day. I'd tell Jonas I was working late when I was really meeting Cal. I'd claim overtime when I was actually at the bistro, feeling alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Cal made me feel seen. When I talked, he listened completely. When I laughed, his eyes lit up like I was the most fascinating person in the room. He remembered details about my day, asked follow-up questions about my frustrations, validated feelings I'd been suppressing for years. "You're wasted on someone who doesn't appreciate you," he said one evening, as we shared dessert at the bistro. "You're smart, beautiful, ambitious. You deserve someone who celebrates that." His words were intoxicating. For the first time in years, I felt desirable, important, worth pursuing. But guilt crept in during quiet moments. When Norah would curl up against me during movies, or when Jonas would bring me coffee exactly how I liked it without being asked, I'd feel the weight of my deception. I pushed those feelings down. Jonas had made his choices, comfort over passion, routine over adventure. I was simply making mine. The turning point came during a family dinner when Gina asked directly about my schedule. "You're hardly here anymore, Iria. Norah mentioned you missed her school play rehearsal last week." "I had to work late," I said, avoiding Jonas's gaze. Not everyone has the luxury of summers off. The dig at Jonas's teaching schedule was petty, but I felt cornered. "Maybe we should discuss priorities," Gina said carefully. "Family should come first." "Don't lecture me about priorities," I snapped. "I work full-time and still manage everything at home. I'm entitled to some personal time." Jonas finally spoke. "No one's saying you aren't, Iria. We just miss you." His quiet hurt was worse than anger would have been, but instead of feeling guilty, I felt resentful. Why couldn't he fight for me? Why couldn't he be more like Cal, passionate, attentive, exciting? That night, I texted Cal about the confrontation. He responded immediately with support and understanding, validating my frustration with Jonas's family. "They don't deserve you," he wrote. "You're too good for their small-minded judgments." I fell asleep feeling justified, planning our next meeting. But as I drifted off, I noticed Jonas wasn't beside me. Through the crack in our bedroom door, I could see light from his study, hear the quiet tapping of his laptop keyboard. I told myself he was probably grading papers or updating lesson plans. I didn't consider that he might be documenting something else entirely. The next morning, Norah seemed withdrawn at breakfast. She picked at her cereal, glancing between Jonas and me with worried eyes. "Are you and Daddy fighting?" she asked quietly. "Of course not, sweetheart," I said, though my voice sounded forced even to me. "Adults just have different interests sometimes." Jonas looked up from his coffee, and for a moment, I saw something in his expression that should have warned me. It wasn't hurt anymore, it was calculation. But I was too focused on my phone, buzzing with a good morning text from Cal, to pay attention to the warning signs. That afternoon, Janet cornered me at work with gossip from her neighborhood. "The strangest thing happened yesterday," she said, settling into the chair beside my desk. "I was at the bistro with my sister, and I could have sworn I saw you there with some guy. Tall, dark hair, very handsome. But it wasn't Jonas." My blood went cold, but I forced a laugh. "Probably just someone who looks like me. I was home with family all afternoon." Janet's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she dropped the subject. That evening, I found an unfamiliar manila envelope on Jonas's desk in his study. My hands shook as I reached for it, wondering what it might contain. Before I could investigate, footsteps in the hallway made me step back. Jonas appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Looking for something?" he asked quietly. "Just checking if you needed anything," I said, my heart racing. "I thought you might want coffee." "I'm fine," he said, moving to his desk and casually sliding the envelope into a drawer. "But thank you." His tone was polite, distant, and somehow more frightening than anger would have been. As I left his study, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. 3 weeks later, our friend group planned a boat trip to celebrate summer. Marcus and Jennifer Webb had rented a pontoon boat for the day, inviting 6 couples for what promised to be a relaxing afternoon on the lake. I was excited. Finally, a chance to break free from routine and show Jonas how fun I could be when given the opportunity. I spent extra time getting ready, choosing a sundress that Cal had complimented during one of our coffee dates. Jonas seemed quieter than usual as we drove to the marina, but I attributed it to his general discomfort with social situations. He preferred small gatherings to group events, another example of his limited social energy. "Try to have fun today," I said as we parked. "It'll be good for us to do something different." "I'm sure it will be memorable," he replied, and something in his tone made me glance at him. But his expression revealed nothing. The boat trip started perfectly. The weather was gorgeous, the company was lively, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely relaxed. Marcus had stocked the cooler with beer and wine, and as the afternoon progressed, everyone's inhibitions loosened. Jennifer suggested we play Truth or Dare as the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water. It seemed harmless enough, just adults being silly, sharing embarrassing stories, and performing ridiculous dares. "Iria's turn," announced Sarah Kim, Marcus's business partner's wife. "Truth or dare?" "Truth," I said, feeling bold from the wine and the attention of the group. "Okay," Sarah grinned mischievously. "Who was the best lover you ever had?" The question hung in the air as everyone turned to look at me. I could feel Jonas tense beside me, but the wine made me feel reckless, invincible. "Well," I said, drawing out the suspense as the group leaned in. "It definitely wasn't my first husband." Everyone laughed, including Jonas, though his smile looked forced. "Come on," pressed Jennifer. "Give us details. We want the real story." I should have deflected. I should have made a joke and moved on. Instead, I felt the intoxicating pull of being the center of attention, of having 8 people hanging on my every word. "Okay, fine," I said, settling back in my seat. Before Jonas, I dated this guy Derek for 2 years. He was intense, passionate, the kind of guy who would surprise you with weekend trips to Vegas or show up at your office with flowers for no reason. I was warming to the story now, enjoying the rapt attention of my audience. "Derek was incredible in bed," I continued, ignoring Jonas's sharp intake of breath. "He had this way of making you feel like you were the only woman in the world. Every time was like the first time. Urgent, desperate, amazing." The group was eating it up, especially the women, who were nodding and making appreciative sounds. "So what happened?" asked Tom Bradley, Jennifer's brother. "Why didn't you marry him?" "He was too much," I laughed. "Too intense, too unpredictable. I needed stability, you know? Someone reliable." I gestured toward Jonas without looking at him. Someone who would be a good father, who would always be there. Sometimes you have to choose practical over passionate. The words came out before I could stop them, and I immediately felt the mood shift. The laughter became uncomfortable, forced. Jennifer shot a worried glance at Jonas, who had gone completely still beside me. "I mean," I tried to backtrack, "different relationships serve different purposes, right? Derek was fun, but Jonas is solid." The damage was done. I'd essentially told our entire friend group that my husband was a consolation prize, a practical choice I'd made when passion didn't work out. Marcus cleared his throat and suggested we move on to someone else's turn, but the energy had shifted. Jonas remained silent for the rest of the game, and I found myself drinking more wine to combat the growing awkwardness. When we finally returned to shore, Jonas helped unload the boat without speaking to me. During the drive home, the silence was suffocating. "You're being dramatic," I finally said. "It was just a game, Jonas. Everyone was sharing stories." "Right," he said quietly. "Just a game. You're really going to sulk about this. It was years ago, and I chose you, didn't I?" I married you. Because I was practical, he said. Because I was stable. Because I would be a good father. Not because you loved me. That's not what I meant, and you know it. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. The wine was wearing off, and shame was creeping in to replace the earlier bravado. We rode the rest of the way home in silence, and Jonas went straight to his study when we arrived. I could hear him typing on his laptop late into the night. The next few days were tense. Jonas was polite but distant, and I found myself seeking comfort in longer conversations with Cal. I told him about the boat trip, framing it as Jonas being oversensitive about harmless fun. He's insecure, Cal said during our Thursday training session. Confident men don't get threatened by their partner's past. His validation felt like a balm after days of Jonas's cold shoulder, but I should have paid more attention to the signs. Jonas had stopped asking about my schedule. He no longer seemed bothered by my late nights or extended gym sessions. Instead of relief, this should have worried me. The bomb dropped on Jonas's 36th birthday. I'd made reservations at Meridian, an upscale restaurant downtown. The plan was to have dinner with immediate family. Just Jonas, me, Norah, Gina, and Tristan. I'd even bought Jonas an expensive watch, hoping to smooth over any lingering tension from the boat trip. We were seated at a round table in the restaurant's main dining room, surrounded by other families celebrating various occasions. Norah was excited, chattering about a project she was working on for school. Gina had brought a homemade cake, and Tristan was telling funny stories about his new job. For a moment, it felt normal, happy even. Then Jonas stood up. "Before we order," he said, his voice carrying clearly across our table, "I have something I'd like to share with everyone." He pulled out his phone, and my stomach dropped as I recognized the voice recording app. "This is from last weekend's boat trip," he continued, his tone conversational but somehow menacing. "I thought you might find it interesting." "Jonas," I said quickly, "what are you doing?" "Sharing a story," he replied, "the way you did." He pressed play, and my own voice filled the air around our table. Derek was incredible in bed. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only woman in the world. Every time was like the first time. Urgent, desperate, amazing. The blood drained from my face as I heard myself continue. Sometimes you have to choose practical over passionate. Different relationships serve different purposes, right? Derek was fun, but Jonas is solid. The recording captured every word, every laugh, every casual dismissal of my husband's worth. Hearing it played back in the quiet restaurant, surrounded by Jonas's family, made the cruelty of my words undeniable. Gina's fork clattered against her plate. Tristan stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. Norah looked confused, glancing between her father and me with growing alarm. "Jonas, stop," I whispered, but he wasn't finished. "This is what my wife really thinks of our marriage," he said, his voice steady but his eyes blazing. "That I was a practical choice, a consolation prize, someone reliable enough to father her child and pay half the mortgage." "That's not. I was drunk. I didn't mean." "You meant every word," he said quietly. "And now everyone knows exactly what you think of me." The restaurant felt like it was spinning. Other diners were starting to notice our table, drawn by the tension and raised voices. A waiter approached hesitantly, then thought better of it and retreated. "How could you do this?" I hissed. "On your birthday, in front of your family?" "How could you say it in the first place?" Gina interjected, her voice sharp with anger. "In front of your friends? About my son?" "It was a game," I protested weakly. "People say things they don't mean during games." "Do they?" Jonas asked. "Because you sounded pretty sincere to me." Tristan was shaking his head slowly. "Iria, wow, that was really harsh." "I want to go home," Norah said suddenly, her voice small and scared. "Daddy, I want to go home now." The sight of my daughter's frightened face broke something inside me. "Look what you've done," I said to Jonas. "You've upset Norah over something stupid and petty." "I've upset her." Jonas's composure finally cracked. You humiliated me in front of our friends, dismissed our entire marriage as a business transaction, and I'm the one who's upset her. You recorded me without permission. You ambushed me. I documented the truth, he said, standing and helping Norah out of her chair. Something I should have started doing a long time ago. The implication of his words hit me like a physical blow. Documentation. Evidence. This wasn't about hurt feelings. This was strategic. Mum and Dad are fighting, Norah said to Gina, tears starting to flow. Why are they always fighting now? Always, Gina repeated, looking at me with new understanding. How long has this been going on, Norah? Months, my daughter said innocently. Mum's always gone, and when she's home, they argue in whispers. I felt the walls closing in as Jonas's family absorbed this information. The recording had been damaging enough, but Norah's innocent revelation painted a picture of ongoing marital problems that I'd been trying to hide. We're leaving, Jonas announced. Gina, would you mind taking Norah home with you tonight? I think Iria and I need to have a conversation. Of course, Gina said immediately, gathering her purse and reaching for Norah's hand. Come on, sweetheart. Grandma will make hot chocolate and we can watch movies. As they prepared to leave, Gina paused beside my chair. I don't know what's gotten into you, Iria, she said quietly, but that man has loved you completely for 9 years. He deserves better than this. Tristan followed them out without saying goodbye to me, leaving Jonas and me alone at the table, surrounded by untouched birthday cake and the wreckage of our marriage. You planned this, I said as soon as they were gone. Yes, he admitted. I did. You set me up, you recorded me without consent and humiliated me in front of your family. I gave you exactly what you gave me, he replied. Public humiliation. The only difference is that I used your own words. I stared at him across the table, seeing a stranger. This calculated, methodical man wasn't the passive husband I'd taken for granted. This was someone who planned revenge and executed it flawlessly. What do you want, Jonas? An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. I was drunk and stupid, and I said things I didn't mean. But you did mean them, he said softly. That's what makes this so perfect. For once in our marriage, you told the absolute truth. He left money on the table for our untouched meals and walked away, leaving me sitting alone in the restaurant with the stares of other diners burning into my back. As I sat there, I realized that everything had changed. The man I'd married, the predictable, passive man I'd thought I could manipulate and dismiss, was gone. In his place was someone far more dangerous, someone who had been watching, listening, and planning, someone who was no longer content to be my consolation prize. The aftermath of Jonas's birthday dinner was swift and brutal. By Monday morning, the story had spread through our social circle like wildfire. Jennifer called to check on me, but her tone carried more curiosity than concern. I heard about what happened at dinner, she said. Marcus feels terrible about the boat trip. We had no idea things were so tense between you and Jonas. It's fine, I lied, pacing around my kitchen while sipping coffee that tasted like ash. Just a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. Well, if you need to talk. But her offer felt hollow, and I could hear the judgment in her voice. Within hours, I'd received similar calls from Sarah and 2 other friends, each one supposedly checking in, but really fishing for details. At work, Janet cornered me during lunch with barely concealed excitement. Spill, she demanded, settling into the chair across from me in the break room. I heard through the grapevine that something major went down at Jonas's birthday. People love to gossip, I said dismissively. It was nothing. Come on, Iria. My neighbor's sister was at the restaurant. She said there was shouting and recording devices and family drama. That doesn't sound like nothing. I felt trapped, exposed. The privacy I'd counted on was evaporating, and I had no control over the narrative spreading about my marriage. That evening, I drove straight to FitCore instead of going home. I needed to see Cal, needed someone who would understand and support me without judgment. You look stressed, he observed as I walked into the gym. Rough day? Rough weekend, I said, following him to a quiet corner where we could talk privately. Jonas is being incredibly petty about something stupid that happened during a game with friends. I told Cal a carefully edited version of events, framing Jonas as vindictive and oversensitive. Cal listened with growing anger on my behalf. He recorded you without permission, he said, his voice rising. That's messed up, Iria. That's controlling behavior. Right? I felt validated, justified. I made one comment during a drinking game, and he's acting like I committed a crime. You deserve better than that, Cal said, his hand finding mine. You deserve someone who trusts you, who doesn't try to humiliate you for being honest about your past. His touch sent electricity through me, and for the first time since Saturday night, I felt desired rather than ashamed. I should probably head home, I said reluctantly. Or, Cal suggested, we could grab dinner. You need support right now, and it sounds like you're not getting it at home. I knew I should decline. I knew I was already walking a dangerous line. But the thought of facing Jonas's cold silence, of dealing with Norah's confused questions about why Grandma had brought her home Sunday morning, felt unbearable. Okay, I said. Just as friends. I need someone to talk to. We went to a small Italian place across town, far from our usual neighborhood. Over wine and pasta, I found myself sharing more than I'd intended about my marriage, my frustrations, my growing sense that I'd settled for the wrong life. You're incredible, Cal said as we shared tiramisu. Smart, beautiful, ambitious. You shouldn't have to dim yourself to make someone else comfortable. His words were exactly what I needed to hear. When he walked me to my car, the kiss felt inevitable. It was soft, tentative, nothing like the passionate encounters I'd described with Derek. But it was new, exciting, forbidden. It made me feel alive in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I should go, I whispered against his lips. I know, he said, but I'm here if you need me, really here. I drove home in a daze, my lips still tingling, my mind racing. Jonas was in his study when I arrived, the door closed, the sound of typing echoing through the house. Norah was already asleep, and I was grateful not to face her questions about the weekend's drama. I went straight to our bedroom, showered, and lay awake staring at the ceiling until Jonas finally came to bed near midnight. He didn't speak to me, didn't acknowledge my presence. The distance between us felt like an ocean. Over the next few weeks, I fell into a pattern of deception that felt both thrilling and necessary. I would meet Cal for training sessions that ran longer than scheduled, followed by coffee dates that stretched into dinner. I told Jonas I was working overtime on a complicated claim, that my supervisor was demanding extra documentation. The lies came easier each time. I'll be late again tonight, I told Jonas on a Thursday morning. Big case, lots of paperwork. Of course, he replied without looking up from his lesson plans. I'll pick up Norah from school. His acceptance should have felt like relief, but instead, it worried me. The Jonas I'd married would have asked questions, would have shown some concern about my increased workload. This new version of my husband seemed almost indifferent to my schedule. At work, my actual performance began to suffer as I spent more time texting Cal and planning our meetings. Janet noticed the change immediately. You're distracted lately, she observed during a team meeting. The Henderson file had 3 errors that should have been caught during initial review. I'm fine, I snapped. Just dealing with some personal stuff. Personal stuff that's affecting your work quality, Janet replied. Maybe you should talk to HR about taking some personal time. The suggestion felt like a threat. I couldn't afford to have my job performance scrutinized too closely, especially since I'd been falsifying overtime records to cover for my meetings with Cal. That evening, I met Cal at the bistro for what had become our regular Thursday dinner. The restaurant was busier than usual, filled with young professionals unwinding after work. We found a table in the back corner, away from the main crowd. You seem tense, Cal observed as we ordered drinks. Work stuff, I said, and home stuff. Jonas is being weird, too calm, too accepting. It's like he doesn't care what I do anymore. Maybe he's finally giving up the controlling behavior, Cal suggested. Maybe he's realizing he can't manage every aspect of your life. I wanted to believe that, but something in Jonas's recent behavior felt more strategic than defeated. I wish I could just start over, I said, the wine making me more honest than I'd intended. New job, new city, new life. Sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating in all these expectations and obligations. Cal reached across the table and took my hand. You could, start over. You're not trapped. I have Norah to think about. Kids are resilient, and she deserves a happy mother, not someone who's miserable and resentful. His words echoed things my mother had been saying for years. When I called Vivian that weekend, she was full of encouragement for my personal growth. You've seemed so much happier lately, she observed during our Saturday phone call. Whatever you're doing, it's working. You sound more like yourself again. Thanks, Mom. I've been focusing on my health, taking better care of myself. Good for you. Don't let Jonas guilt you about prioritizing your well-being. Men like him want to keep women small and dependent. Her words reinforced what Cal had been telling me, that Jonas's hurt was really about control, that my pursuit of happiness was threatening his dominance in our relationship. But Sunday dinner at Gina's house told a different story. The atmosphere was arctic from the moment Jonas and I arrived. Gina was polite, but cold, offering minimal conversation. Tristan seemed uncomfortable, making awkward small talk about his job while avoiding eye contact with me. Norah, however, was her usual chatty self with her grandmother and uncle, describing school projects and playground drama with animated gestures. But I noticed she stayed close to Jonas throughout the meal, seeking his approval and attention in ways that felt pointed. How's work, Iria? Gina asked during dessert, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than politeness. Busy, I replied. Lots of overtime lately. Complex cases requiring extra documentation. That's odd, Gina said thoughtfully. When I called your office yesterday to see if you could help with Norah's school pickup, they said you'd left at normal time. The blood drained from my face. You called my office? Norah was feeling sick, and Jonas was stuck in a faculty meeting. I thought maybe you could leave work early to get her. I felt Jonas's eyes on me, watching my reaction carefully. There must have been some confusion, I said weakly. I was probably in the field, investigating a claim. Probably, Gina agreed, but her expression suggested she wasn't buying my explanation. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. As we prepared to leave, Gina pulled Jonas aside for a private conversation while I helped Norah gather her things. Is everything okay, Grandma? I heard Norah ask. You seem sad. Just worried about some grown-up stuff, sweetheart, Gina replied. Nothing for you to worry about. But as we drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that Gina's worry was specifically about me. That night, I found Jonas in his study again, surrounded by papers and files I didn't recognize. When he saw me in the doorway, he casually closed a folder and turned to face me. Working late? I asked, trying to sound casual. Research, he said, for a project I'm working on. What kind of project? Nothing that would interest you, he replied, his tone polite but dismissive. How was your overtime yesterday? The question felt like a trap. Fine. Complicated case, like I said. Right, the complex documentation you mentioned. We stared at each other across his desk, and I had the unsettling feeling that he knew exactly where I'd been yesterday evening. But he didn't press the issue, just turned back to his work with a small smile that made my skin crawl. As I headed upstairs to bed, I heard him making a phone call. Hi, Mom, he said quietly. Yes, I think we need to talk. Can you come over tomorrow after Norah goes to school? I stood on the stairs, straining to hear more, but his voice dropped too low to make out specific words. Whatever he was planning, it involved his mother. and that couldn't be good for me. That night, I texted Cal about my growing paranoia. "He's definitely suspicious," I wrote. "I think he might be building some kind of case against me." "Case for what?" Cal replied. "You're not doing anything wrong. You're just taking care of yourself." But even as I read his reassuring words, I knew that wasn't entirely true. I was lying about my schedule, falsifying work records, and having an emotional affair that was rapidly becoming something more. The question was, how much did Jonas know, and what was he planning to do about it? I fell asleep that night with the uncomfortable feeling that I was walking into a trap I couldn't see, set by a man I'd underestimated for far too long. The confrontation I'd been dreading came on a Friday evening in mid-July. I was at the bistro with Cal, celebrating what I'd told Jonas was a successful resolution to a major insurance case. In reality, I was drowning my sorrows after receiving a formal warning at work about my declining performance and suspicious overtime claims. "You're too good for that place anyway," Cal said as we shared appetizers at our usual corner table. "You could do so much better if you weren't tied down by other people's expectations." His hand rested on mine across the table, and I felt the familiar thrill of his attention. Over the past month, our relationship had evolved from emotional support to something undeniably romantic. We hadn't crossed certain lines yet, but the tension was building toward an inevitable conclusion. "Sometimes I think about what it would be like," I said, the wine making me bold. "Starting fresh somewhere new, with someone who actually appreciates me." "It could happen," Cal said, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "You just have to be brave enough to take what you want." I was about to respond when I saw a familiar figure approaching our table. Jonas stood there in his casual Friday clothes, khakis and a polo shirt that made him look every inch the suburban teacher he was, but his expression was anything but mild. "Hello, Iria," he said politely. "Cal." My heart stopped. "Jonas, what are you doing here?" "Having dinner with my wife," he said, pulling out an empty chair and sitting down without invitation. "Since she's working so late on that important case." Cal's hand tightened on mine, and I saw his jaw clench. "This is a private conversation," he said. "Is it?" Jonas asked mildly. "Because it looks like a date to me." The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too public. Other diners were beginning to notice our table, drawn by the tension crackling between the three of us. "Jonas, please," I said quietly. "Let's discuss this at home." "Like we've discussed your overtime schedule?" he asked. "Or your complex documentation projects? I think we're past private discussions, don't you?" He pulled out his phone and set it on the table between us. "I've been documenting quite a few interesting things lately. Your work schedule, for instance. Did you know Meridian Insurance has security cameras in their parking garage? Time-stamped footage of employees coming and going." My blood turned to ice. "You've been watching me." "I've been protecting my family," he corrected, "gathering evidence of exactly what kind of mother and wife you've become." Cal stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You need to back off, man. This is harassment." "Harassment?" Jonas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm having dinner with my wife and her trainer. That's what you call yourself, right? Personal trainer?" "Cal, don't," I warned, seeing the anger building in his face. But Cal was already moving around the table, his fists clenched. "You want to threaten someone? Try threatening me instead of hiding behind lawyers and recordings." "I'm not threatening anyone," Jonas said calmly, remaining seated. "I'm simply stating facts. Iria has been lying about her schedule for weeks. She's been falsifying work records to cover for these dinner dates. She's been neglecting our daughter while pursuing personal training." His emphasis on the last words made them sound dirty, shameful. "That's enough," Cal snarled, grabbing Jonas by the shirt and hauling him to his feet. "You want to control your wife? Do it at home. Don't bring your domestic drama into public." "Let go of me," Jonas said quietly, but he made no move to defend himself. "Cal, stop," I pleaded, aware that the entire restaurant was now watching our confrontation. Phones were coming out, People were recording, and I could see my life imploding in real time. But Cal was beyond reason. Months of hearing about Jonas's controlling behavior had built up his resentment, and now he was face to face with the man he saw as my oppressor. "You don't deserve her," Cal said, his voice carrying across the restaurant. "You're a pathetic, boring little man who can't handle having a woman with actual ambition and passion." "You're right," Jonas agreed conversationally. "I probably don't deserve her, but I do deserve honesty, and my daughter deserves a mother who doesn't lie about where she spends her evenings." Cal shoved Jonas backward, sending him stumbling into another table. The crash of dishes hitting the floor brought restaurant staff running, but the damage was already done. "Cal," I screamed, rushing to put myself between them. "Stop this right now." But Jonas was already straightening his shirt, his expression eerily calm, despite having just been assaulted in front of dozens of witnesses. "Thank you," he said to Cal. "That was exactly what I needed." The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. This hadn't been a coincidence. Jonas had orchestrated this confrontation, had provoked Cal into exactly the kind of public scene that would make us both look unstable, violent, unfit. "You set this up," I whispered. "I documented it," he corrected, "just like I've been documenting everything else." Restaurant security was approaching our table now, and I could see at least 3 people still recording with their phones. By morning, video of Cal shoving my husband would be circulating through social media, along with audio of our entire confrontation. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," the security guard said to Cal. "We're all leaving," I said quickly, grabbing my purse. "This was just a misunderstanding." But as we walked toward the exit, I heard Jonas speaking to the security guard behind us. "I'd like to file a report," he said. "That man assaulted me, and I have witnesses." My legs nearly gave out. A police report would create an official record, something that could be used in legal proceedings. Jonas wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. He was building a case. Outside the restaurant, Cal was pacing angrily in the parking lot. "That bastard planned this whole thing," he said. "He knew exactly what buttons to push to make me lose it." "Why did you let him?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why did you give him exactly what he wanted?" "Because I'm tired of watching him manipulate you," Cal exploded. "Tired of seeing you make excuses for his controlling behavior." "It's not controlling when it's true," I shouted back. "I have been lying. I have been falsifying records. I have been neglecting my daughter." The admission hung between us in the humid evening air. For the first time since our relationship began, I was being completely honest about what I'd been doing. Cal's expression softened. "Iria, you were just trying to find some happiness. There's nothing wrong with that." But there was everything wrong with it, and we both knew it. I'd been so focused on justifying my actions, on framing myself as the victim of Jonas's boring predictability, that I'd lost sight of the actual damage I was causing. "I need to go home," I said quietly. "I need to try to fix this." "What about us?" Cal asked. "What about everything we've talked about?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I need time to think." But even as I said it, I could see the doubt creeping into Cal's eyes. The confident, supportive man who'd been encouraging me to leave my marriage was suddenly faced with the messy reality of what that would actually mean. Police reports, custody battles, public humiliation, none of that had been part of his fantasy of rescuing me from suburban mediocrity. I drove home in a daze, my phone buzzing constantly with texts and calls from friends who'd already seen the videos online. By the time I pulled into my driveway, Norah Bistro meltdown was trending on local social media, and my face was clearly visible in several of the recordings. Jonas was waiting in the living room when I walked in, still wearing the clothes Cal had grabbed and wrinkled. Norah was nowhere to be seen, hopefully asleep and unaware of the evening's drama. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. "Weeks," he admitted. "Ever since I realized you weren't going to stop lying voluntarily." "You could have just asked for a divorce. You didn't have to humiliate me publicly." Like you humiliated me on the boat. Like you've been humiliating me every time you lie about working late while you're actually on dates with your trainer. His words hit home because they were true. I had humiliated him, repeatedly, thoughtlessly. But his methodical revenge felt so much worse because it was calculated rather than impulsive. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you decide," he said. "You can end this affair, commit to marriage counseling, and try to rebuild some trust. Or you can continue down this path and face the consequences." "What consequences?" Jonas smiled, that cold, calculating smile I'd been seeing more often lately. "Divorce, custody battle, financial audit of your falsified overtime claims, character witnesses testifying about your fitness as a mother, video evidence of your boyfriend assaulting your husband in a public restaurant." Each word was a nail in the coffin of my old life. I'd been so focused on the excitement of my affair, so convinced that Jonas was too passive to fight back, that I'd never considered he might be capable of this level of strategic thinking. "You've been planning this for months," I said. "I've been hoping I wouldn't need to use it," he corrected, "but you've made your choices clear." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Jonas slept peacefully beside me. My phone continued buzzing with notifications, friend requests from strangers, comments on the viral videos, messages from acquaintances expressing shock and concern. By morning, my entire life would be public knowledge. The affair I'd thought was secret, the lies I'd thought were clever, the marriage I'd thought I could manipulate, all of it was now exposed for everyone to judge. And the man I'd underestimated for 9 years was sleeping soundly, having executed his revenge with surgical precision. I finally understood that I wasn't dealing with the passive, boring husband I'd married. I was dealing with someone who'd been watching, learning, and planning while I'd been playing games I didn't even know I was losing. The fallout from the bistro incident was swift and devastating. By Saturday morning, local news outlets had picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about social media and public meltdowns. My face was plastered across Facebook feeds and Twitter timelines, accompanied by commentary ranging from sympathetic to vicious. "Insurance analyst's marriage drama goes viral," read the headline in our local paper's online edition. The article included quotes from witnesses who described the confrontation in embarrassing detail. I called in sick to work on Monday, unable to face the inevitable questions and stares from colleagues. But Janet called me that afternoon with news that made my stomach drop. "HR wants to see you first thing Tuesday morning," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Something about discrepancies in your timecard records." "Discrepancies?" "Iria, they know about the falsified overtime. Someone sent them documentation showing you weren't actually working when you claimed to be. They're talking about termination." I hung up and immediately tried calling Cal, but his phone went straight to voicemail. When I drove to FitCore, the receptionist told me he'd taken a leave of absence to deal with personal matters. He was abandoning me. The man who'd spent months encouraging me to prioritize my happiness, who'd validated my frustrations and supported my choices, was disappearing at the first sign of real consequences. That evening, Jonas returned from school with Norah and a manila envelope that made my blood run cold. "Divorce papers," he said simply, setting them on the kitchen counter, "and a notice for an emergency custody hearing next Friday." "Emergency," I repeated weakly. "Based on concerns about Norah's well-being," he explained, "your recent behavior suggests you may not be fit for unsupervised custody." "That's ridiculous. I love my daughter." "Love isn't enough," Jonas said quietly. "Stability matters. Honesty matters. Being present matters." He was right, and we both knew it. Over the past months, I'd missed school events, forgotten pickup times, and left Norah with babysitters while I pursued my affair. I'd been so focused on my own happiness that I'd neglected the person who should have mattered most. "Daddy, why are you and Mummy talking about lawyers?" Norah asked from the doorway, her backpack still slung over her shoulder. Just some grown-up business, sweetheart, Jonas said gently. Why don't you go start your homework? I'll be up to help in a few minutes. As Norah headed upstairs, I saw her glance back at us with worried eyes. She knew something was wrong, had probably known for months, while I'd been telling myself she was too young to notice the tension. She'll hate you for this, I said to Jonas once she was gone. She'll understand when she's older, he replied. Children need stability, Iria. They need parents who keep their promises and tell the truth. The custody hearing was a nightmare I hadn't seen coming. Jonas's lawyer presented a devastating case built on months of carefully documented evidence. Bank records showing charges at restaurants when I claimed to be working. Time-stamped security footage from my office building. Text message logs obtained through legal discovery. But the most damaging evidence was Norah herself. The family court judge spoke with my daughter privately, and whatever she said clearly influenced his decision. When we returned to the courtroom, his expression was grave. Based on the evidence presented and my conversation with the minor child, he announced, I'm granting temporary primary custody to the father, with supervised visitation for the mother pending further evaluation. Supervised, I gasped. She's my daughter. She's a child who needs stability, the judge replied firmly. Your recent behavior suggests a pattern of deception and poor judgment that raises questions about your fitness as a custodial parent. I watched Jonas accept the custody order with quiet dignity while my world collapsed around me. The man I'd dismissed as boring and passive had outmaneuvered me completely, using my own actions as weapons against me. Outside the courthouse, Gina was waiting with Norah. My daughter ran to Jonas immediately, wrapping her arms around his waist in a way that broke my heart. Can I go home with Daddy? She asked, not even looking at me. Yes, sweetheart, Jonas said, stroking her hair. You're going to stay with Daddy for a while. What about Mommy? Mommy needs to work on some things, he explained carefully, but she loves you very much and you'll still see her. The clinical language couldn't disguise the reality. My 9-year-old daughter had chosen her father over me, and a judge had agreed that was the right choice. That night I sat alone in our house, my house now, since Jonas had moved out with Norah, and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. My phone buzzed with a text from Cal. I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. You need to focus on your family. Even my affair partner was abandoning me. The man who'd spent months telling me I deserved better, who'd encouraged me to pursue my happiness regardless of the cost, couldn't handle the reality of what that pursuit had destroyed. I called my mother, desperate for support and understanding. Oh, honey, Vivian said when I explained the custody ruling. I'm so sorry, but maybe this is a blessing in disguise. A blessing? I lost custody of my daughter. Temporarily, she corrected, and maybe now you can focus on rebuilding your life without all the pressure and judgment from Jonas's family. Her response felt surreal. I'd just lost everything that mattered, and she was treating it like an opportunity for self-improvement. Mom, I need practical help, legal advice, character witnesses, something to show the court I'm a good mother. Are you, though? She asked gently. Honey, you've been miserable for years. Maybe this is the universe telling you it's time to start fresh. Even my own mother wasn't willing to fight for me. The network of support I'd counted on was evaporating, leaving me truly alone for the first time in my adult life. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of legal meetings, supervised visits with Norah, and desperate attempts to salvage my reputation. At work, I was placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of their investigation into my falsified records. The insurance industry was small, and gossip traveled fast. Even if I kept my job, my career prospects were essentially destroyed. During my supervised visits with Norah, I tried to explain my side of the story, to make her understand that I'd never meant to hurt anyone. I was just trying to be happy, sweetheart, I said during one awkward lunch at a family restaurant, the court-appointed supervisor watching our every interaction. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they're trying to figure out what they want. But why did you lie to Daddy? Norah asked, her voice small and confused. He said you lied about working late. It's complicated, I said weakly. I was confused about some things. Were you dating that man from the restaurant, the one who pushed Daddy? The question hit me like a physical blow. My 9-year-old daughter had seen the viral videos, had heard the gossip at school, had pieced together enough of the truth to understand what I'd done. Norah, I don't want to talk about it, she said quietly, turning her attention back to her chicken nuggets. Can we just eat lunch? For the remaining 30 minutes of our visit, we sat in silence while I watched my daughter retreat into herself. The bright, chatty girl, who used to tell me everything about her day, had been replaced by someone guarded and distant. When the supervisor ended our visit, Norah hugged me dutifully, but without enthusiasm. I love you, Mummy, she said, the words sounding rehearsed. I love you too, baby. More than anything. But as I watched her walk away with the supervisor, I knew that love wasn't enough to undo the damage I'd caused. My daughter was protecting herself from me, and I couldn't blame her. That night, I found myself driving past Jonas's new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom place near Norah's school. Through the window, I could see them working on homework together at the kitchen table, the scene so normal and peaceful that it made my chest ache. This was what I'd thrown away. Not just a marriage, but a family. Not just a husband, but a partner who'd loved me completely until I'd made that impossible. I'd spent months telling myself that Jonas was the problem, that his predictability and contentment were holding me back from happiness. But sitting in my car, watching them through the window, I finally understood the truth. Jonas hadn't been the obstacle to my happiness. I had been. And now, as I faced the prospect of losing everything I'd once taken for granted, I realized that the boring, stable life I'd rejected might have been exactly what I needed all along, but understanding came too late. The man I'd underestimated had already moved on, and he'd taken my daughter with him. The final custody hearing was scheduled for a cold Tuesday morning in November. I'd spent the previous months in court-mandated counseling, desperately trying to rebuild my credibility and demonstrate my fitness as a mother. My lawyer, a public defender who seemed more interested in plea bargaining than fighting, had warned me that our chances were slim. Your husband has an airtight case, she'd explained during our last preparation meeting. Character witnesses, financial records, documented evidence of deception and adultery. Unless you can prove he's unfit, the court will likely grant him permanent custody. He's not unfit, I'd admitted reluctantly. He's actually a good father. Then you need to focus on proving you've changed, that the behavior documented over the past year was an aberration rather than a pattern. But how do you prove you've changed when everyone in your life has already written you off? My former friends avoided my calls. My co-workers whispered when I walked by. Even my mother seemed more interested in discussing my fresh start than helping me fight for my daughter. The only person who'd offered genuine support was my court-appointed therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd spent months helping me understand the depth of my self-deception. You constructed an elaborate narrative to justify your choices, she'd explained during one of our sessions. You cast yourself as the victim of a boring marriage, and your husband as an obstacle to your happiness. That narrative allowed you to avoid taking responsibility for your actions. But I was unhappy, I'd protested. That part was real. Unhappiness doesn't justify deception, she'd replied gently, and it doesn't excuse neglecting your responsibilities as a mother. Her words had been hard to hear, but they'd forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding for years. I had been selfish. I had been dishonest. I had prioritized my own desires over my family's well-being. But understanding my mistakes didn't erase their consequences. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit and minimal makeup, trying to project stability and maternal responsibility. But as I walked into the courthouse, I felt like an imposter playing a role I'd already lost. Jonas was waiting in the hallway with his lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman who'd built her reputation on complex family law cases. He looked calm and confident, wearing the same kind of outfit he'd worn to parent-teacher conferences and school plays, the uniform of a responsible father. "Hello, Iria," he said politely when he saw me. "How are you holding up?" His courtesy felt more devastating than anger would have. After everything I'd put him through, he could still treat me with basic human decency. "I'm okay," I lied. "How's Norah?" "She's doing well, adjusting to the new school, making friends. She misses you, of course." The "of course" felt like a kindness I didn't deserve. Inside the courtroom, I watched Jonas's case unfold with horrifying precision. His lawyer presented evidence like a surgeon removing a tumor. Methodical, thorough, devastating. Bank records showing my lies about overtime. Hotel receipts from afternoons I'd claimed to be working. Text message logs revealing the emotional affair that had consumed my attention while my daughter struggled with our deteriorating marriage. But the most damaging evidence was the school counselor's report. Norah exhibited signs of anxiety and emotional distress throughout the spring semester, the counselor testified. She frequently asked to call her father during school hours, complained of stomach aches, and showed declining academic performance. When asked about home life, she described frequent arguments between her parents and her mother's increasing absence. I wanted to object, to explain that I'd been trying to find myself, that my unhappiness had been affecting everyone. But the facts spoke for themselves. While I'd been pursuing my affair, my daughter had been suffering. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to present the narrative Dr. Chen had helped me construct, a story of temporary poor judgment, of lessons learned and changes made. "I made serious mistakes," I told the court. "I lost sight of my priorities and hurt the people I love most. But I've been in counseling for 6 months. I understand now what I did wrong, and I'm committed to being the mother Norah deserves." Jonas's lawyer cross-examined me with surgical precision. "Mrs. Harker, during the period when you were falsifying work records to cover for your affair, how many of Norah's school events did you miss?" I'm not sure of the exact number. According to school records, you missed her spring concert, 2 parent-teacher conferences, and her class field trip to the Science Museum. Is that accurate?" "Yes, but—" "And during this same period, how many times did you meet with Mr. Finch for non-professional purposes?" "I don't know exactly." "Phone records show 47 calls and over 300 text messages between you and Mr. Finch over a 3-month period. Does that sound accurate?" Each question was a nail in my coffin, building a picture of a mother who'd prioritized an affair over her child's well-being. When Gina took the stand as a character witness for Jonas, her testimony was devastating in its quiet dignity. "Jonas has always been a devoted father," she said. "Even during the most difficult period of his marriage, he never missed a school event or failed to put Norah's needs first. That child is the center of his world." "And what about Mrs. Harker?" Jonas's lawyer asked. Gina paused, and I could see her struggling with her natural kindness. "Iria loves Norah," she said finally. "But love isn't always enough. Children need consistency, honesty, and stability. They need to know their parents will keep their promises." Even Tristan, who'd always tried to stay neutral, testified about Jonas's character and parenting abilities. "My brother is the most reliable person I know," he said. "When he commits to something, you can count on him completely. That's especially true when it comes to Norah." My mother took the stand on my behalf, but her testimony felt more damaging than helpful. "Iria has always been a free spirit," she said. "She needs room to grow and explore, to find her own path. Sometimes that means making mistakes, but that's how we learn." The judge's expression suggested he wasn't impressed by the idea that adultery and deception were simply part of my personal growth journey. When all the evidence had been presented, the judge called for a brief recess. I sat in the hallway, watching Jonas comfort Norah, who'd been called to speak privately with the judge again. My daughter looked small and nervous, but she clung to her father with complete trust. When court reconvened, the judge's decision was swift and final. Based on the evidence presented and my conversations with the minor child, I'm awarding permanent primary custody to the father. The mother will have supervised visitation every other weekend, with the possibility of unsupervised visits after completing 1 year of continued counselling and demonstrating stable employment and housing. Your Honour, my lawyer interjected, my client has been making significant progress in counselling. Progress is commendable, the judge interrupted, but it doesn't erase a pattern of deception and poor judgment that directly impacted the child's well-being. This court's primary concern is Norah's best interests, and those interests are clearly served by maintaining stability with her father. I felt the words hit me like physical blows. Supervised visits, 1 year of counselling, demonstrated stability. The judge was treating me like a danger to my own daughter. As the courtroom cleared, Jonas approached my table. "Iria," he said quietly, "I want you to know this wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting Norah." "I know," I whispered, because I finally did understand. Everything he'd done, the documentation, the strategic confrontations, the methodical building of his case, had been about ensuring our daughter's well-being. "She loves you," he continued, "and when you're ready, really ready, I won't stand in the way of you rebuilding that relationship." His generosity in victory was almost harder to bear than his calculated revenge had been. Even now, after everything I'd put him through, he was thinking about what was best for our family. "Thank you," I managed to say. As I watched him leave the courthouse with Norah, I understood that this was the end of the story I'd been telling myself for over a year. The narrative, where I was the misunderstood victim of a boring marriage, where my pursuit of happiness justified any deception, where my husband was too passive to fight back. That story was over. In its place was a harsher truth. I had destroyed my family through selfishness and dishonesty. I had prioritized my own desires over my daughter's needs. I had underestimated a man who loved his child enough to do whatever was necessary to protect her. The man I dismissed as boring and predictable had outplayed me completely, using my own actions as evidence against me. He'd documented every lie, every deception, every moment when I'd chosen my affair over my family. And in the end, justice had been served not through dramatic confrontations or emotional appeals, but through the simple presentation of facts. The truth had been enough to destroy the life I'd taken for granted. As I sat alone in the empty courtroom, I finally understood that Jonas had never been the obstacle to my happiness. I had been my own worst enemy, and now I would spend years trying to rebuild what I'd so carelessly destroyed. The game was over, and I had lost everything that mattered.